so cool to see you guys here. I'm really excited to talk about this. It's something that is kind of a branch off of a bigger concept that I talk about a lot. So it's something I love to talk about. And it has multiple uses. I really like things that have multiple uses. So as we're talking about storytelling, this is going to be applicable to you and your life, which is awesome. It's going to be applicable to client work if you're getting into client work or you already are into client work. Even if you're someone who has been doing client work for a while, maybe this is a great way to help frame it for the client. This is really cool for helping it seem more digestible for a client. And also, thanks, Blaze. It's also really handy and helpful for actually writing your own book. I don't know if you can see my name on here. I call myself the storytelling astrologer, and that's like it was on a whim and just for fun, but that's mostly because my other identity, aside from astrology being my primary love language, my secondary is puns and words in the form of fiction that can actually heal people and make people's lives better and maybe even make the world better. I actually wrote a book on this called Writing the High Vibe Hero's Journey. And I wrote that back in 2020. And I will tell you, if the title weren't so, self-explanatory, I'd probably change High Vibe because even since then, High Vibe has gotten a little bit saturated. But the concept still stands. It's something that through story, we can use the analogy of character, of plot, of character progression, and different challenges or even different villains to emulate things that we go through in our own lives, but in a safe space of being able to process these things with enough distance to examine ourselves, examine our situations, and therefore apply the coping mechanisms of actually conquering the beasts that we find ourselves encountering in real life through the analogy of that character in a fiction story. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about that today, but again, it does translate to real life. So as we get ready to get started, if I could get like a thumbs up or something here, just to make sure my sound is coming through all right, everybody can hear me okay. That way I can make sure. Yeah, thanks, Blaze. Awesome. I just want to make sure that as I'm talking, you guys are able to hear it. So that's the important part. And as you can see, Kazimi Khan has been lovely enough to post the link to the Canvas slides, which I will be using as reference through this talk. So you can follow along as well. I will let you know when I'm moving from one slide to the next if you feel like doing that. And if you would like a copy of these slides, you can DM me or anything. If they're not downloadable already from that link, just let me know and I will make them available for you. So thank you guys for being here. I think we'll go ahead and kind of get started with a little bit more into what we're going to be talking about today. So I've alluded a little bit that we're talking about story. And story happens whether you're reading a book, whether you're watching a movie or a television show, or even the news, right? Story is everywhere. It's a cycle. And I think as astrologers, or even just people who are interested in what's going on in the spheres above us, cycles are something that we can really relate to. So this is how, through story, you can become, you're the hero of your own story, but you can become the mentor in someone else's story. In the Joseph Campbell framework of the hero's journey, there's always this mentor that comes out of nowhere. We recognize this mentor. It's Gandalf. It's Dumbledore. It's whoever that person is in the story that really guides out of nowhere, has all the wisdom and guides the hero along their journey. When someone comes to you as a client, or when a friend comes to you for an ear, or when you're doing something in your life, there's a mentor figure. And in consultations, and even as an author, if you choose to be a fiction author or even a nonfiction author, the role of the mentor is you. So that's a really cool thing to know, that wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whatever phase of life you feel like you're in, and that's a spoiler, whatever phase of life you feel like you're in, you are still the mentor in someone else's story. You're still the hero in your story. Just as, there's that dialogue and that kind of meme that goes on right now where we hear that you're the side character in someone else's story. There's place for that. And there's a role for you to fill in every interaction you are a part of. And consciously, as an astrologer, or even as someone who looks to the sky for inspiration for fiction stories, we can be the mentor that helps someone else find their way. So, in that way, also, stars are mentors and mentors are stars, which is cheesy, but a really nice way to think about things if you want to draw it into the astrological context. And that's a really magical feeling. So, anybody who's following along, hey, Gabe, following along on the slides, I do have a quote here to kick us off that is from an astrological magic book. It is the 3 books of the cult philosophy, book 1, chapter 2, if you're interested, by Agrippa. And that quote is that magic, thinking about magic, right? Magic comprehends, unites, and actuates. Deservedly, therefore, it was by the ancients esteemed as the highest, most sacred philosophy. It was, as we find, brought to light by most sage authors and most famous writers. This has so many layers that we can pull apart just for the purposes of being in this moment right now. Knowing that magic comprehends, unites, and actuates, but so does story. Story comprehends, unites, and actuates. And I actually have a couple more quotes following this that will help us really see how those things tie all together and how a story can be a form of magic, and how you can use story in consultations and in sharing a metaphor or an allegory that is meant to guide someone in a very similar fashion. So if you're following on the slides, the very next slide, I think it's slide number 3, we go into the magic of story and how these things compare. Stories, in their essence, are essentially myths. And again, as astrologers, this is familiar to us. We know what myths are. We use them all the time as we explain the cycles of Venus in relative to Inanna, or just all of the ways that we explain how the movement of the stars affects us here. So myth and story are very tightly knit, and they do help us to understand things that normally are hard to put into words. So they help us to express archetypes and the occult virtues that come down through that chain of being that we hear about in the mindset of astrology, where everything comes down through the spheres and then the sublunar spheres to us. So that's one way that we can think about story being something that's useful, again, in writing, but also in consultation, also in ways of relating to each other. As we move to the next slide, we can understand that, again, stories are modern myths. So taking a moment to really sit on the fact that if a story is a modern myth and a myth is something that we use to relate to each other, to explain concepts to each other, how important is it that we take responsibility for the way that we tell our stories? Again, the way that we tell our stories, as in the stories that end up on bookshelves in Barnes and Noble, depending on how, the publishing industry is going right now, but that's a whole other talk. But also how we share a story to a client as we're expressing this chart that could be completely unfamiliar to them. And many clients will come to us saying, I have Saturn in the 7th. We've all heard that one before. They're probably really nervous that they may never find someone to support them in life. You, as this astrologer, can tell them a story that helps them understand what that natal promise really is and how they can use it. You become the mentor, encouraging the hero along. So that is one way that we can really think about it. I do also list the axioms of magic on the PowerPoint, because these things, these concepts, are really used in story as it is. And so if you're thinking as an astrological magician who offers consultations, who works with any kind of other human being interaction, you might be thinking about how these laws or axioms really come into play and how you can consciously use them. On the slide, I've bolded a few, like the law of worldviews, which is very 9th house, right? The law of labeling, personification, duality, that struggle or tension or opposition between good and evil. That's something that we all really face in life. And that's something that your client is going to come to you with something on their mind, something that they know they want to overcome or at least want clarity on. And this kind of becomes like a 7th house known enemy kind of thing. It's that duality. It's the them facing or looking to overcome or looking to at least accommodate around this other thing. So of all of these are themes that we see showing up in the story of life. And again, we talk about the story of life and myth and even astrology. If you've ever tried to explain the complexity of a moment in astrology, to someone who doesn't necessarily have that vocabulary at hand, it can be really interesting. And so, again, using story, you can relate it to them. And there's a book called Planet Narnia by Michael Ward. And this book actually theorizes that C.S. Lewis's Narnia series, 7-book series, each book was actually written in respect to or in honor of one of the traditional planets. Well worth a read. But one of my favorite concepts from this book is the idea of donegality. And it's just a term that C.S. Lewis coined himself to really encapsulate the feeling that you get from reading a story. And the feeling that is this unique, really important tool that you get to use when you're talking to your clients, when you're writing a story. This, to me, in high vibe fiction, is the key to everything, this donegality. So I'll read a quote really quickly from Planet Narnia that explains donegality, and then I'm going to relate it back to our astrology. So donegality is the fact that lovers of romance go back and back to such stories in the same way that we go back to a fruit for its taste, or to an air for itself, or to a region for its whole atmosphere, to Donegal for its donegality, and London for its Londonness. It's notoriously difficult to put these tastes into words. That is exactly how a lot of us feel on the daily, especially these days when we're trying to explain the overarching social cycles of the outer planets and what's going on. And even when you're talking to a client about eclipses, we have eclipses coming up this week. A lot of clients may be starting to feel that and coming to you for guidance. And so how do you relate this to them without it's just an eclipse in this house? You could also relate a story to them. I see this a lot, and I am very fascinated by it with astrologers who use asteroids. That's where story really has begun to permeate, because asteroids offer so much nuance with the myth that goes along with the characters of their namesake. So that's another place to look if you want to get a feel, the donegality of how this actually works in practice. But in practice, in astrology, what this reminds me most of is the concept mentioned in Picatrix, quoting Hermes, of perfect nature. If you follow Christopher Warnock, he just came out with a great book called The Celestial Way, and it really tries to encapsulate how we can live in alignment as much as we can understand with perfect nature. And so Picatrix describes perfect nature as the spirit of the philosopher or sage linked to the planet that governs him. That is that which opens the closed places of knowledge, and by which is understood that which cannot otherwise be understood at all. So again, it's that same donegality concept of, what does this feel like? What does it look like? How can I relate to it? Someone explained to me what a pawpaw fruit tastes like. And if you just say, well, it tastes like a pawpaw fruit, that's not going to help. I've never had a pawpaw fruit. But you can say, oh, it tastes like mango and banana. And that is something I can take my preconception of, my experience from before, combine it, and understand the nature of the flavor of this fruit. So also, fun fact, if you didn't know, pawpaw fruits taste like mango and banana, and they actually do. So I recommend, if you have the opportunity to taste the pawpaw, go for it. And one of the things I really like about this KazimiCon happening right now, thank you, Kayla. I think it's funny too. I really like the reactions, you guys. I appreciate those. They're helping me along here. So thank you. One of the important things about why we're having KazimiCon now, why all of this is happening now, I think many of us know there's a couple transits coming up, especially like, let's look at March 2023. There's a couple things coming up that we've all got our eye on. It's on the horizon, and we're trying to prepare as best we can. We're trying to predict the way the market's going to go, as we would talk in publishing. We're trying to figure out what's going to be important next and how can we be there to support it. So maybe get ahead of it a little bit, right? As astrologers, one of the things we try to do is get a little bit ahead of the times so that by the time everyone gets there, we can be the ones who hold them. We can be the ones who catch people who are maybe caught off guard by what's coming and what's going on. So a little bit about what's coming, right? We do have Pluto moving into Aquarius in March 2023, dipping back out and coming back in by January 2024. We have Saturn coming into Pisces, which I can't put a sturdy finger on it, which is probably right on brand, but this is the one I'm watching the most. Because for storytelling especially, Saturn moving into Pisces is like adding structure to the story. And I think that that's why a lot of astrologers, like I'm not the only one, even in this conference, talking about story and astrology, right? So it's important that we're understanding why is the collective or why is this idea coming up. If you've ever read Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, by the way, it's 11:11 on the East Coast, woohoo. Um, if you've ever read Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, it's a book for writers that really honors the idea of stories as these alive things that choose us as a conduit for them to express themselves through. Boy, does that not sound like a diamond in astrology, right? Does that not sound like, hey, this transit has come around and it's time, you've been activated and kind of called to share this story? Everybody is experiencing that every day. And some of us get to write it down, or some of us get to be the consulting astrologer who helps someone else make sense of the journey. And I really think this Saturn in Pisces is something that is going to help us bring the moral to the story, right? Adding the structure to that which is formless, or in another sense, reforming that which is formless. So I really think in publishing, even in astrology, all of these things that are hard to grasp, like sand between your fingers, we're going to be finding ways to conceive of them. And I think in some ways, society is going to be looking for ways to anchor their understanding of things. So it helps as astrologers to already have a framework to say, oh, a pawpaw, yeah, it's mango and banana. And the better you have your language prepared for this, the more you're prepared to be able to be that person who can speak to people when they're looking for the structure, because you've seen it coming as the amazing astrologer that you are. And you've kind of given it this structure, this form to the formless. And I'm going to give you the form that I have found and I'm using today. I'm literally going to tell you exactly how I would not only outline a book using astrology, but also how I outline our lives using astrology. And I'm going to use an example chart that I hope is as entertaining as it is impressive with the astrology. It's very astrology good. I'll put it that way. So we'll be getting to that in just a few moments. The other thing that I have my eye on in the further, more distant future is Uranus moving into Gemini, because think about how communication is going to transform or evolve and progress at that point. As someone who is an astrologer, but also I mentor people on writing fiction stories that can heal others, we're keeping an eye on the publishing industry. We're keeping an eye on the consulting anybody industry. Like, how are your connections and communications with clients going to change? I have a feeling structures like this, where we meet online virtually, where everybody can access everybody, are going to be a little bit more common. So it's really cool that all of you are here today already catching the edge on that. So first of all, thank you for being here, for listening with me, but also thank you for being so interested and invested in this future that is coming, that you are progressing your own knowledge and learning your, like, a new language, as we all do as astrologers, so that you can be the translators to people come March and all the months and years that come following that, with all the changes that are coming. So I want to talk a little bit more about Joseph Campbell and the Hero with a Thousand Faces, which is the book that Joseph Campbell wrote. Thanks, Kayla. The book that Joseph Campbell wrote that really explains the monomyth. What a cool word is that, right? So the monomyth is truly the hero's journey. That's how we understand it. And the thing I found really great about reading The Hero with a Thousand Faces was how real all of this is. And Joseph Campbell seemed to understand this as he was making this comparison as well. He says, we shall only have to follow, therefore, a multitude of heroic figures through the classic stages of the universal adventure in order to see again what has always been revealed. This will help us to understand not only the meaning of those images for contemporary life, but also the singleness of the human spirit and its aspirations, powers, vicissitudes, and wisdom. This, to me, when you pull it apart, is actually cycles, right? This would be like Saturn returns, or even larger scale things, right? We're looking at ancient stories that are repeating itself. This is, as Richard Tarnas put it, history rhyming. Someone else may originally have that quote, but when I first heard it, it came from Tarnas. So I want to make sure I attribute that. But this is the fact that old stories are going to come back with a new flavor. And so knowing our old stories is going to be helpful. But at the same time, what is one of the most popular fiction trends right now? It's retellings. if you've read Circe by Madeline Miller, or Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller also, there are retellings of Beauty and the Beast all over the place. Hello to my ACOTAR fans out there. So it's very important that we know the sources of these so that we can capture that Donegality, capture that perfect nature, and then retell them in a way that keeps it to the integrity, but makes it in a way that we can actually understand it now. Because that moral of the story, that Saturn in Pisces, needs to continue. It's this thing that has to endure through the enigma. So it's cool to do an entirely new story around the spine of this moral or of this concept that helps us to really understand and learn from what has come before. Because if we just rewrite the entirely new story, we get an entirely new story. Awesome. But in the idea of retellings, we get to maintain what we learned from the last one and then make it relevant to now so that we can rhyme rather than repeat. And I think that that's really helpful. So if you are someone who is aspiring to write a book, I encourage that as an application in fiction writing as well. It is a very huge passion of mine. For reference, I have 20 years of writing and publishing experience, but I also have 20 years of folk magic, healing arts, and psychic medium channeling, as well as I'm coming on to like 6 years as a practicing astrologer with about 10 years of study. And so all of this to me just really does rhyme with itself too. I found this in 2020 when I was having my Saturn return. I had outlined this, so it's not going to be quite as impressive as it sounds when I put it into a sentence here. But the morning of my 30th birthday, during my Saturn return, I woke up and over 11 hours wrote an entire book that gives structure to a fiction story so that it becomes a healing modality, so that the author becomes a healer, or as I make the comparison, a mentor in the book. And I called that Writing the High Vibe Hero's Journey. That's available on Amazon and all those places. If you're here though, right now and today, I'd be happy to just send you a free PDF version. So you can DM me for that as well if you'd like, because I think you guys are so impressive for being here and taking time out of your day. Doing this, I'm happy to give you something that might be helpful. I'm also working on a High Vibe Hero's Journey astrology edition, which is taking some of the techniques I'm about to show you and saying, if you have a chart for the moment that you had a story idea, here's how you write that book. So yeah, it's it's interesting, Kayla, right? Like it's important stuff. And so I wrote this book again during my Saturn return, your and yours. Congratulations. Saturn is stationing today. Those of you with Saturn in Aquarius, you are in the long haul towards the finish line. That's amazing. I'm happy for you. So I actually took this and created a program that is called the Forgotten Storytellers. And I'm bringing that up because we are taking pitches. If you are someone who wants to write a fiction story that heals people and you'd like to do it with support and you'd like to do it using some framework with astrology and spiritual development, my business partner and I are opening up pitches right now to join our next cohort, and you'll be able to write a book in under 4 months, which is super fun because 3 months is a Mercury cycle. So yeah, we did that on purpose. And so we do have more than 50 case studies working with this, and it is ever evolving, of course. But that is how we help people really discover their own power, because writing the story is going to heal you. And then the healing that you do goes into that story, and it's just infinite, the amount of people that you can reach with a book, right? It goes to anybody, it goes to anywhere. It can be translated, it can reach any corner. So a book is very Saturn and Pisces as well, because it can do all the things, but it's a nice tangible way to get there. So now that we're kind of sitting in this space of understanding how important story is to the world and to connecting with people and to sharing what's going on in the sky with the people that we are talking to, let's talk about how to do it. This is so much fun. This is my favorite part. So weaving story. Now I'm going to share with you one technique that can be used for consultation and for writing. So this technique is used however you want to use it, whatever's useful to you today, and whenever it's useful to you in the future, in whatever context. It translates all over the place. And if you're following in the slideshow, we're on slide 11. So what we're looking at is weaving the story. And if you are able to have your natal chart ready, then this is a great time to look at your natal chart so you can see. I'm going to give you a hint. You're going to want to also pull up your secondary progressed chart if you have that opportunity. So we're going to kick off with how we know this stuff and how we can trust what's coming through for us. Like when you have a story idea, is it a story idea? When you have an intuitive ping, isn't it an intuitive ping, or is it just your imagination? As someone who is, like I said, have been doing this for like 2 decades, and I really shouldn't be that old, but I am. I've been doing this for 2 decades, and what I've realized is the answer to is it my imagination or is it my intuition is yes. If it's coming out of fear, I would investigate the fear and be curious about it and follow it because it's leading you to intuition. But in this case, the answer is yes. Follow it. See where it takes you. If it leads you to somewhere that stops, go in a different direction, but you got that far so you could find the different direction. So at least, you have progress all the time. And I know someone that many of us have heard of, wrote about 2,000 years ago. I don't know them personally because they are long gone, but their wisdom remains with us. And this is Maternus in the book Methesis, who's going to help us decide and really realize where this key to finding story and to translating intuition and to finding healing can come from. And that is in Maternus in Methesis, book 1, chapter 4. Maternus says, to whom does the whole nature of divinity both show and produce itself, if not to the mind, which, having come forth from the celestial fire, has directed itself toward the ruling and direction of earthly fragility. I just love that quote, first of all, because can we always think about the sky as the celestial fire, please? Like that just makes life feel like more of an adventure, and I'm here for it. But also knowing that our mind is where these things come in. If you spend your whole life questioning your mind, you might miss some stuff. So I think it's a really great idea, especially to try this out in telling story, because the mind, as we see, is represented by the moon, but also in our chart by the third house. Now, those two have something in common. The moon takes her joy in the third house. It's the joy of the moon, the house of the goddess. It's a cadent house, which is called metacosmios, which is another great word that can sometimes be interpreted as like that liminal space. So, of course, this is where we might find inspiration coming to us from some kind of other source. I know Kayla knows what I'm talking about. So, in Guido Bonatus, the anime Astrologiae, we get the quote, for she, the moon, is the schoolmistress of all things, the bringer down of all the planet's influences, and a kind of internuncio between them, carrying their virtues from one to the other by receiving the disposition of one planet and bearing it unto another. We get to feel this. The moon translates for us in astrological magic. That's why the moon is so important. I don't know if you follow me on TikTok, I post these goofy little skits of telling the transits of the day in story. So I give each planet a character and they interact with each other. And then the moon makes sense of it for anybody who's watching the skit and then wants to know how you actually apply that to life. So yeah, it's super fun. I have a really good time with it. I hope if you watch them that you enjoy them as well. Thank you. But we have in this third house of writing, we have the mind, we have indirect divination. So of course the mind and inspiration go together. And that's where writing and communication also fall. So as we look into the lunar heroic journey, which is one of the things that I've coined as I'm looking into writing this, I know I'm gonna do this because it's a pun and I can't resist. I'm gonna call my structure book on how to write a book using astrology. It's going to be called Written with the Stars. Like non-negotiable. I already know. And the good news is I've recently created a publishing house, so I don't have to argue with the publisher over that one. So let's talk a little bit about the lunar heroic journey. If you're following along in the slides, this is on slide 14, and we see a cycle or a circle that really describes the hero's journey as imagined by Joseph Campbell, beginning with the call to adventure, in introducing the supernatural aid, the threshold guardian, which is meeting the mentor and the helper, temptation, death and rebirth, transformation, atonement, and the return, right? Those are the plot points that we see unfold in a story. You have your major plot points that have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and some stuff that happens in between, like the call to action, like the climax, and all of those climactic moments that really push the character towards a goal. But there's some cool nuance that I've recognized that I really was able to realize thanks to the moon, that I'm really excited to share with you. So my favorite thing about the PowerPoint, if you haven't opened it, these next slides, slides 15 through 17, are my favorite part of the whole presentation because they outline in a 3-act structure an entire story, but also life at the same time. So we're going to take the phases of the moon, and I'm going to show you how they match the phases of the hero's journey. So I'm going to have to do this, of course, by explaining it, but I do have the slides where you'll be able to catch a visual of them as well. So thinking about this, we look at Act 1, the beginning of the story. This is where a lot of tone is going to be set, a lot of establishing stuff. And sometimes you can notice that, like a book or even a consultation, you have to kind of clear your throat and you're like, okay, how much do you know about astrology? Where do you want to go with this? And there's this moment of getting to know either the characters in the story or the character that you're speaking to, the client. So we have this hook, which is also representative of the new moon. This is where the story begins. The theme is stated, and the old world still exists. This is in a story, of course, all of those things, but in your life or in your client's life, this is the introduction. This is, hey, the old world still exists, because I haven't blown your mind with astrology yet, but also because you haven't had this revelation that's going to propel you towards your higher purpose or calling or whatever you're here to find. In Mysteries of the Dark Moon, Demetra George explains the new moon as this dark dawning and light beginning to increase. So we're pursuing this understanding. We're ready to be illuminated, and we're heading in that direction, but we're still in that incubation phase a little bit. The sprout has only just come up above the surface. That's when we move into the call to adventure. This is where you as the consulting astrologer comes in. And in a story, this is where we introduce the stakes, acclimate to the settings, really get used to where are we now and what do we have to work with. For the crescent moon phase, this is, as Demetra George would put it, light quickening, and we're out in the open now. We've stepped out. We've gone outside the door. We're ready to embrace the world, maybe not exactly sure what we're doing yet. And one of the things I want to bring into attention is, again, the secondary progressed moon is also going to be key in your consultation with clients, because this is where they're at in life. They're in a 30-year story where you can say, hey, you're in your crescent secondary progressed moon phase. You're exploring things. It's okay that you're not really sure where things are going, but you have this ambition and this pull towards something. Let's explore where that might be going, because again, as the astrologer, you get to see where that full moon happens. You get to see where the old new moon was. And looking ahead, and we'll be talking about this in just a minute, you'll get to see what the balsamic phase looks like. The balsamic phase is probably my favorite phase of the story, even though I know it's one of the hardest times to endure as an actual person going through life, mostly because it has to last like 3 years. That's kind of a pain, but we can work with it. We can make it part of the story. We can turn this thing into our training montage that makes us ready for the next thing. So continuing through Act 1, we reach the threshold of the story where the action is initiated, usually via conflict. Now, as astrologers, when we hear the keyword conflict, there's an aspect that typically comes to mind, and that is a square, right? So this is the first quarter moon phase. This is where light and dark are now balanced, but light is overtaking. And the funny thing that you'll find as you work with clients through the secondary progressed moon phases is that light is not necessarily right. And I'm going to explain that as we go into Act 2 here. And this also goes for a story. So the light is increasing and we're starting to get confident, right? Think about the light as coming from the sun. We're gaining this confidence, but then we move into Act 2 where we face some more challenges. We've initiated into action. We're ready to fight whatever's in front of us, but we're still a little inexperienced. So as these challenges arise, in a story, a character makes a push to achieve what their initial goal is. In life, we end up, when we begin a journey, we think we know what the solution will be. If I could only have this, then I'll be happy. If I could only have this thing or only reach this point in my life, then everything will make sense. This is where light is dominant. We have the ambition, we have the drive, and then we reach the midpoint of the story. I like how in Hero of a Thousand Faces, Joseph Campbell calls the midpoint a revelation. I think that is so much more true than midpoint, even though the midpoint is the middle of the story, sure thing. But the revelation and the full moon are so different from the way that we view a midpoint. One of the things that you'll hear as a writer is it's the sagging midpoint, because not a lot happens. It's this, what do I do with the middle stuff? I disagree. And I think when we start to understand actual character progression through life and story, we get to understand as well that we've arrived at our initial goal. We got what we thought we wanted, but it's not what we thought it was going to be. And there's a bigger picture that we get to really dive into now with the remaining phases of the moon. So Kayla, I saw that you have questions. I'm going to try to make sure we have some time that I can actually invite some of you to speak with me and we can have a dialogue about this. I'm looking forward to that. So with the full moon, we get the light peaking. The light has reached its peak. We got what we thought we wanted, right? But there's still half a cycle to go. What do you do with this? This is where the next phase comes in that Campbell calls a death and rebirth, because along with getting what you thought you wanted, you realize what you deserve. And sometimes there's a bit of a journey left for that. So this is where the disseminating moon comes in, where you react to this wisdom that you've now acquired thanks to the full moon. You begin releasing that which you no longer need so that you can start making space for the growth and the transformation that comes along. And that growth and the transformation in the moon is represented by these stirrings of the dark. The dark here, I think, is very important. We really get to see it as we come into Act 3 of life and again of story, remembering that our clients are going through a full moon phase where they're reaching the culmination of what they began likely 15 years ago in their new moon phase. And now sometimes they're like, oh yeah, a lot of things are getting recognized now. And it's giving me guidance as to what to do from here. So that's really helpful. It's a reflecting time, as the moon teaches us. It's time to really take stock of how far we've come and to create awareness of how far we have the potential to continue. So in Act 3, we begin with a transformation, which happens at the same time as a last quarter moon. Again, we encounter this square aspect, which motivates us through conflict or challenge to do something, to take action. We have to notice this. This is another thing, and I'm going to thank Gabe here, that I was reminded of this morning. The angles of the chart are the most active. And so the angles created by a square creates action as well. So we have this transformation, this last quarter moon, where light and dark are balanced again, but this time the dark is overcoming. And normally you'd be like, whoa, KristaLyn, the dark is overcoming. We're losing to evil here. What? You're not. The dark in the moon is not evil and good. The moon is the moon. It's always translating light to you. And the amount of light it's giving you is either putting things into perspective or integrating them. So we have this transformation. As the light begins to dwindle, we have this quiet that happens with the moon and in our lives, especially in the secondary progressed moon, where we have to start kind of sitting with ourselves and taking stock of who are we? Where do we go next? What's happening? What's really important to me now that I know everything I know? In a story, this is usually where the hero finally realizes what's important, the true things that are at stake. We realize that seventh house villain, that known villain, is maybe a decoy. This happens a lot in stories where you have like the initial villain, but then there's something behind them, that 12th house villain that now becomes known. And now we pushed forward towards atonement. Atonement in Joseph Campbell's is where the climactic moment will happen, right? This is where the battle scene takes place. But atonement, if you think of one way of saying atonement, it's at one mint. And yeah, this is pun number 2. But pun number 2 is my favorite one because it's at one mint. We step into the fullness of our potential. We take on all of our power and we use this darkness, even though it's not really darkness, we use this wisdom that comes from insight and from introspection to make a difference. Now we're in the depth of the dark and we come into the balsamic moon phase where we've learned a lot and now we are fighting the demons and we're overcoming the demons and having that experience. Because in a story, really, and in life, you'll be able to say this to your clients and to be able to give them this perspective. I'm so glad you're enjoying the puns. Thank you. So what you find is that everything we encounter is a message for us too. We hear this all the time. Anybody who does intuitive work also knows this. Like your clients are reflecting something in you And what your clients are bringing to you is probably a reflection on them, but it's also a reflection on you. We are all so connected and nobody meets anybody by accident. So if you start noticing that like a lot of your clients are having balsamic moon phases all of a sudden, check your secondary progressed phase because you might have that too. Or you might be going through a minor kind of balsamic moon period in your own life where the transits feel a lot like this trial and tribulation mode. We have those, right? It doesn't have to just be 30 years. It's cycles within cycles. And so you might notice that this at one mint reminds you that everybody is connected, that there's something about that person, even if they're frustrating you, there's something about them that is like you, and there's something you can learn from that. And then you get this moment of fully integrating into this new worldview that you have understanding of now that you've been able to really take this in. So that is The Return by Joseph Campbell's standards, but this is also a new dawning, a new moon, a new cycle for you to enter into. And if a client is in this space, they have maybe you can tell them you've made it. You've made it to this new thing. From here on out, it's a new dawning. And that's really great. I had a client just last week where it's like, I know you've been going through a lot of this stuff and it's been really hard. And I was able to tell them exactly like how long it's been hard for. And they resonated with that, right? Which gave me the honor of saying, you made it. Just like I was able to do, as we're talking about Saturn stationing direct, saying to people with Saturn in Aquarius, hey, you've almost made it. We get to see that as astrologers. How blessed is that? How gifted are we to be able to receive this information and then translate it to people who are really yearning for that kind of closure? We are each living a story. And you may have followed me right onto page 18 of the slideshow with this. So thinking about your chart, if you're living a story, then your natal chart, here's another pun for you, is once upon a time. It happens once upon a birth time, and it is you. You are expressing this story in your chart. And I have an entire way of how to use a chart to really pull out characters from what I call an inspiration chart, which I did give a lecture on last week at Astromagia. That'll be available either on my website or it's, I think, currently available on Astromagia. It's a longer lecture, but it's more of like a workshop thing where I'll walk you through your chart or the chart of the moment you had an idea for a book and how to find the chart of the moment that you had an idea for the book, because I know how vague that can sometimes feel. But for now, let's talk about us expressing our stories. Talk about us expressing this once upon a time. We've talked about how the lunar cycle is much like the hero's journey, but so is the natal chart. The natal chart begins with the self. It begins with this moment of, I'm like the only one here. It's self-awareness and maybe self-centeredness, not egotistical, but a centeredness around my awareness of myself. And from there, we develop and we grow through each of the houses all the way back around until 12. You can use this as like a perfection kind of wheel, right? Where you have your year 1 and then you move around. Surprise, surprise, I'm in a year 9 and I started a publishing house and I started speaking on the hero's journey, which is fantastic. So wherever you are in your journey, you will see reflected in your chart. And you can write a story about that. I talk about Chiron as the secret to this in my other talk, and I'd be happy to answer questions about that because we only have this one section left where I get to explain how the secondary progressed moon really shows up in your life hero's journey. And I'm going to do it with someone who is a bit controversial right now for every good reason, but is also therefore a really great example of how this works. So we're going to start with someone who is a writer and who was the conduit and the person who brought forth a story that really not only marked a generation, cough, cough, millennials, but also really set forth this ability to kind of dive into books again. This person, J.K. Rowling, in case you haven't guessed, really helped to reinvigorate books and the book industry in a whole new way where people like us now can say, hey, I know books, I write books, I do all of these things. I'm not saying the character of J.K. Rowling is the best, especially right now. So I definitely do not want to say that I'm advocating for that at all. I officially do not. But this gives us a really great perspective on how the moon shows up in a life cycle. So we start with the natal chart, right? What's the natal promise for J.K. Rowling's moon? And that's a natal crescent moon. So by Demetra George's definitions, this is someone who is bringing something a little bit fresh into the world, starting something kind of new, or at least breathing new life into something. And we can see that that did happen. So that's really cool. But we also have this moon in an eighth house stellium in Virgo. And for those of you who are not looking at the slides, the sun is in the seventh house of Leo in J.K. Rowling's chart. Of course, we have an Aquarius rising. And then we have a stellium in Virgo of Mercury, Venus, Uranus, Pluto, and the moon, all in Virgo at J.K. Rowling's birth. But then we look at when J.K. Rowling got the inspiration for Harry Potter. Let's jump forward quite a bit of time to 1990 on roughly July 15th. There is actually a timeline online in the Rowling Library that tells when Harry Potter was truly downloaded all at once into J.K. Rowling's mind, the mind again, right? So when this happened, the whole story came, as she said, fully formed while she was stuck waiting for a train. She was like delayed 6 hours trying to get somewhere during a really hard time in her life where she was now a single mom trying to find a place to live, trying to find a way to support herself. And all of these really hard things were happening. Now take a guess what secondary progressed moon phase she might have been in when everything was falling apart and being really hard for her. It was the progressed balsamic moon. But now we get to see again that darkness, not necessarily the evil, right? In this time of trial and tribulation, inspiration was able to come through as well. That darkness of the balsamic moon connects enough that we can kind of go into those liminal spaces and receive all of this information in sort of the way that Elizabeth Gilbert would say a story idea is able to choose you. In astrology, we might say that a diamond of this story is able to come through and express as well. So in 1990, J.K. Rowling has her secondary progressed balsamic moon phase, which naturally, by the cycle of the moon, takes us through into a new moon phase, which would have happened, believe it or not, in Virgo. So we have this new phase happening as well in Virgo. That's where the new moon was. And the release of Harry Potter did not take that long. You know, I expected when you hear the story of J.K. Rowling having to pitch 30 different people before getting a yes, first of all, to anybody who is pitching and writing, I want you to know that's not a lot. That's not a lot. So if you've pitched more and gotten more rejections than 30, that's totally okay. I think J.K. Rowling was extraordinarily fortunate, especially, you know, for the time she began this sort of trend of writing more. So of course, it might have been a little bit scaled down at that point, but I want to encourage all of you, like it's not the same. And the industry is completely changing at this moment. So it's important to remember that what was a standard before is no longer the standard. We are setting new standards as we go. And like I said at the beginning, I think 2026 is going to be really telling for the publishing industry. But the US book release of Harry Potter happened on September 1st. Yes. Yay. So the release of the US version of Harry Potter happened September 1st, 1998. And so at this time, J.K. Rowling was at her first quarter phase. So the new moon phase has happened. She wrote Harry Potter in her new moon phase, right? How cool. But this is the first quarter. So we've reached this moment of something coming into view. We have this balance between light and dark, but light is gaining. And that's where Harry Potter releases with this secondary progressed first quarter moon in Sagittarius on her midheaven. Yeah, okay, that's again very telling. At the same time, though, we do have her secondary progressed Venus in Libra conjunct her natal Mars, partile conjunct her natal Mars in the ninth house of publishing. So bringing her art to kind of burst forward. Also taking into account that, you know, Mars is the ruler of her third house. So naturally, it might be some writing things involved with this. Also, Mars is the ruler of her 10th house. So a lot of those things are going to go back to possibly the publishing world in J.K. Rowling's life. Then we move forward a little bit more. Let's jump to the Harry Potter movie release. I think this is another plot point to look at, right? So for her, the plot point here is actually happening during a waxing gibbous phase. So we're coming into that culmination, that full moon time of her life in secondary progressed phases. So this movie comes out, and of course, throughout her full moon, the movies continue to come out. So we reach this peak where the story kind of outgrows the creator in this sense. It takes on a mind of its own, as it really did, especially when these movies released. So this thing grows bigger than a physical person can really hold on to. And in that time, I wonder if that was a bit of a blow to her ego, because when we do jump forward and we do acknowledge that the individual who brought forth these stories could have done a little bit better with the power that she was given with words, looking especially at a certain tweet that was tweeted on June 6th in 2020, that tweet happened during the next balsamic phase, and also during her lunar return. Her secondary progressed moon is at 25 degrees Virgo in this chart, and it is conjunct Mercury, but at the same time, it is exactly conjunct itself in her natal chart. So we have this return. And the next new moon phase, which she is in right now, she's actually in her new moon phase. The moon is not even out of Libra by progression. It's at 29 degrees as of today. And her sun and Mercury by progression are exactly conjunct in Libra right now. So she is tweeting a lot of words right now that are showing kind of what the next 30 years of her life are going to be, what the themes are going to be. So this seems to be something, a piece of her that she is, for now at least, committed to. But maybe we take a look in a couple of years during that first quarter secondary progressed moon phase and see what kind of check-ins happen and how the universe really conveys its messages to her through that new call to action that hopefully comes. So that is just a really brief and quick example of how we can see a full cycle of the progressed moon phase really bringing itself about. And I hope that was, illuminating, that it really helped to put into perspective what this cycle looks like when it's lived, because that's something you're going to be able to use when you're talking to clients. Knowing, and the more clients you take, the better you're going to get at this, obviously, because when you can say, oh, a client went through this actual thing during their balsamic phase. A client went through this actual thing during their progressed full moon phase. Then you get more ways to really translate that donegality or that perfect nature that we talked about before to the client that is in front of you now. You have examples. You can say a pawpaw tastes like mango and banana because you've experienced it and you've seen it happen and you have those case studies. So that is what I hope will be able to help you in using story, not only in consultation, but in your own life, so that you can reflect on that. You can track how it's going for you. And also in translating story to paper, to pages, to modern myth that you can help heal people with, whether they've come to you in consultation or they've approached your book on a shelf in a bookstore. So I hope that that's really helpful. And again, anybody who's interested, I'm happy to provide a free PDF copy of Writing the High Vibe Hero's Journey. It's more attuned towards like people who are spiritually aware and looking to make a book their own healing modality, but there is astrology involved. The Written with the Stars book is outlined and in the process of being drafted. It will release through my publishing company that I started, probably within the next few months. I started a publishing company that is Ninth House Publishing during my Ninth House Perfection year, because puns, right, guys? Puns. And I also have the Forgotten Storytellers program, which is now officially open for pitches. So if you do have a story and you would like my guidance and the guidance of my business partner, Emily, to help you get this story out there, we would be happy and thrilled. We love doing this. We would be happy to personally walk you through that 4-month process with the Forgotten Storytellers program. It's at at just forgottenstorytellers.com or ninthhousepub.com. And of course, if you want to stay in touch with me, which I would absolutely love, I'm here on Twitter at @RealKristaLyn or at @TheRealKristaLyn on TikTok and Instagram, where I post those skits I mentioned, personifying all the transits and then translating them as the moon. I just recorded this morning. I get a giggle out of them, and I hope you do too, because of course art should be fun for the creator. And when it is, it's usually fun and healing and cathartic for the person who is receiving it on the other side as well. So, oh, one more thing that we just opened up today. If you feel like writing a book and learning about magic and astrology and stuff, but maybe also in Ireland, we did open up a writing retreat that Emily and I are leading in Ireland next August. The link for that and to pitch your book for the Forgotten Storytellers are all in the link in my bio here on Twitter. So you can check those out as well and stay connected, because you guys, I absolutely love you guys too. So this is amazing. I can see some of you are already interested in that PDF. I will be sending those out immediately after this talk. But now I managed to keep the time down so we have 10 minutes to chat amongst ourselves and to do a little bit more here, which I would love to do if my lovely co-host thinks that's a good idea.
Yes, it's totally up to you, but I think that'd be great.
Cool.
Great job. That was amazing.
Thank you. It's different not being able to show the slides and like be on video, but I do love how we can actually do this on Twitter and just like start it up and get going. So really cool. Thank you. Does anybody have, just use the hand emoji, I guess, to like raise your hand if you'd like to pop in, and I'll make you like a speaker. Or no, it looks like that's being handled for me. So yeah, cool. Cameron, I think that's you on the other side of the Kazemi Con. So hi.
Yes. Hello.
Yeah, thank you for helping me out. And thank you for inviting me to this. So yeah, I know, I think Kayla just put her hand up. So I think I know how to do this. I will invite you to speak. And I see someone else was also made a speaker. So we can move on to that next as well if you'd like. Hi, Kayla.
Hi. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. So I'm kind of more new to astrology versus some other special interest topics that I have as an autistic woman.
Me too.
I can tell. I love it. But no, I really resonate with, so I'm a researcher. I work in tech, but I'm also a spiritualist, and I do, have intuitive gifts, blah, 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 and do readings and stuff. So I've kind of come to astrology in a strange way where I started kind of getting these downloads and designs and didn't really understand what it was. And then I started looking at astrology and I'm like, damn, this isn't an app or something. Like, it's an astrology chart. I've been studying like Islamic astrology, history, and astrolabes. And I really like the way that you bring storytelling and like that kind of human element and the holding space. It reminds me of like Curandera's talk about like Platicus. You bring like the talk therapy element that's missing in divination for me today. That's why I don't really like doing like traditional tarot readings and stuff. I feel like it's not really holistic. So I'm really excited to follow more of your work. Maybe one day I can even convince you to like come onto one of our Congo Square spaces and interview or tell story. Because we're talking about storytelling as medicine. And I also wanted to find out more about your writing program. Like, I'm not really in a situation to like pay for a course right now, but I know you talked about next year. So I just would be interested. And thank you so much again.
Yeah. So for more information on the writing program, we do run that every 4 months. So if now's not the time, we'll be there for you later. Not a problem. We're also doing an online version, which is going to be more at your pace and stuff like that we'll be able to launch hopefully in January. So we're trying to make it as accessible as possible, whether you want to do it like personally mentored by my business partner and myself or accessing it virtually. We're doing everything we can to make that really fun for everybody.
It's crazy too, because January I turned 30 and I'm in my Saturn return. So everything you said was like, it's kind of like I felt like I got a free reading today.
Yes, perfect. Well, I'm really glad that you feel that way. And as far as convincing me to enter that dialogue about storytelling that's healing, obviously I'm there. So yes, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's only everything I talk about in my life all the time. So you want to talk about special interests all day, every day. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Kayla. That's awesome. So the other person who is currently a speaker is I can't read the rest because it's
sorry.
Hey. Did you want to say anything or are you still listening? Okay. All right. So we do have like 5 minutes if anybody else does have
Oh my God, I'm
questions.
so sorry. I thought I was unmuted that whole time.
No. Hi. Great to see you or hear you.
Yeah, my name is Koi. So I just more wanted to express gratitude and just observation about the new moon and the full moon. It's like the archetypes, the common archetypes we see, like Naruto, Sasuke,
Yes, yes.
Aang, Ozark, Dexter, Van Dyke. And like when you said that, which is a crazy name when I think about it and say it out,
Yeah.
like man, like okay. But it's the kind of that whole journey and all of the story. Usually you have, I mean, you have two outcomes. Either they work together and realize that the journey was the friends they made all along, or um they defeat that evil or whatever, but then realize that they still have to face, aspects of themselves, even though they defeated the external evil. So, when you were talking about that, that definitely did give me a very nice visual because I'm more of a visual person, and I feel
Mhm.
like a lot of people, my biggest issue is that I know a lot of this stuff individually, but
Mhm.
then like often like I don't like charge readings or anything like that fully because it's mostly me talking to friends, associates, and running through it and what's coming up for them in that moment. But to be able to just give someone a birth chart reading, and I'm like more of a
Mhm.
storyteller. I'm a Gemini stellium, okay? Storytelling,
Oh
let's go.
yeah.
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 And so, but if I don't have that kind of outline, then it does kind of go into the rambling world. So this frame would be awesome. Also, I cannot send you a message for some reason, but I would be interested in PDFs and everything you were talking about. But yeah,
Okay. Can you tweet me or something so I can make sure I get it right when I connect with you?
sure.
Awesome. Yeah, because I want to make sure that I do get all the details correct on that, and I will send you one of the PDFs for sure. But
All
yeah,
right.
you make the excellent point that again, we were talking about those archetypes of characters. And so those characters are relatable. We see ourselves in a lot of characters. Like you might notice that you feel like a lot of the characters that you love the most because they're going through something similar to what you feel you go through. And
It's
that's where
actually
myth really
only
comes around too.
it's actually only within recent years that I've really been able to relate to characters that I'm gonna guess that has something to do with Aquarius in the 10th house. What was I about to say? But that is like okay, if you look at the show Ozark, to me that's a very kind of
Mhm.
like Cancer Capricorn thing. And when you kind of see the main characters and the main enemy, well, you can see like the main actresses that we're dealing with, and that is something that I've always paid attention to. So it's pretty fun if anybody, wants to add that to their thingy. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's so helpful when you realize like story is analogy and that it really is actual life. Like so cool.
Yeah, and anime does that really well. But
Oh
once
yeah.
again, thank you so much for the space. Definitely opened up my mind.
Yeah, thank you. So glad it was helpful. And yeah, I too am a big fan of anime. Cartoons do a really great job because they're so easy to imagine with to begin with because they don't have to follow like actual physics. But
Well,
again, that's
they're deep into the archetype. Like they're not
mhm.
necessarily like they are like if it's an Aries character, like that's like it's like like full. It's like all the characters have stelliums basically in
Yeah, yeah,
whatever they are, and it's like these
yeah.
blatant oppositions, which I think is really cool and dynamic.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the cool thing again about what I coin as high vibe fiction is it really does give that feeling because ultimately here's a big spoiler alert. The feeling is what people are looking for. The feeling is what's going to help someone heal because the feeling is attached to whatever belief is there. We form beliefs and they guide our actions, and those beliefs come from how we felt about a circumstance. So, if you're going to go into actual like healing modalities, I'm certified in like 15 of them at this point. I did a lot of study on this. Like, I have Jupiter in the ninth exalted. So I really like studying stuff and I like spirituality and writing. Um, but it's really important to think about like what feeling am I sharing with people? And when you notice that, then you found your theme of your story. And also in the Forgotten Storytellers and in that lecture I just gave last week at Astromagia, which again will be available, I think, on my website soon, but is also available on astromagia.com or org. I talk about the key to finding that in your own birth chart as Chiron. So I go into more detail on how that looks and examples of that in the lecture and in the program. But if you're already really interested and you feel like now's the time for you to figure that out, Chiron is something to explore, which is weird because I love traditional astrology, like first and foremost, but Chiron has always been like following me on my astrological journey. It was on the first chart I ever drew for myself. And so I investigated it, and it became a big deal to me. And Chiron is actually conjunct my Jupiter in the ninth. So maybe that's not too surprising. So it looks like we have reached time, I think. And so I want to honor the fact that other amazing speakers are about to begin. I encourage you guys check this out. I know Kayla, I think Kayla, aren't you a speaker as well during this conference?
I'm not a speaker at this conference.
Okay.
I just have a different event today. But thank you.
Gotcha. Well, everybody check out Kayla's event. I know I'll be keeping in touch as well. Looking forward to it. Thank you all for being here. This was recorded, so we'll be able to use clips and stuff like that. If you DM'd me or if you tweeted me, I will send you the PDFs and you'll have access to your free copy of Writing the High Vibe Hero's Journey. And if you feel like writing with us, again, you can pitch or come to Ireland with us through the link in my bio. Get to know me better however you want to. I'm here to be your friend. So thank you all. Thank you, Kazemi Khan. I will check you guys out moving forward. It's great to meet all of you. Have a great day.